Hello and welcome to the 2016 Homeless Count Volunteer Training. Thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate the time you're giving to the Homeless Count today, as well as your time on the day of the count. My name is Paul Lang. I'm the Homeless Count Regional Coordinator for SPA 5. I'm joined by Jonathan Hans, who's the Count Coordinator for SPA 4.
Hello there.
We're going to go through a brief introduction here of what we're going to cover today, and then you'll hear from both Jonathan and I throughout the training session. So the training, we're going to look at about the homeless count, why we count, go through the volunteer training, and give you some opportunity to see where you can get your questions answered. So let's begin.
All right, let's talk about the homeless count. We're going to look at what the homeless count is and the goal of the homeless count, and then we're going to go further into why we do the homeless count. So let's look at what the homeless count is. The homeless count is a census of everyone experiencing homelessness in the Los Angeles Continuum of Care, which covers Los Angeles County, which you can see here on the map on the right. Let's take a closer look. So here we have all of Los Angeles County, and we break it up into 8 different service provider areas, or SPAs we call them for short. So you can take a look on the map here and maybe see where you're located right now. We cover all of Los Angeles except for Long Beach, Glendale, and Pasadena. They do their own count. So it's a huge area that we cover. It's actually the largest homeless count in the country. And so because of that, it takes 6,000 volunteers just like yourselves over 3 days and nights to cover our area for our continuum. And these are the official numbers used by policymakers, service providers, and the U.S. Congress, which is pretty cool. And so the number one goal of the homeless count is accuracy. The most accurate results lead to the best solution. So we want to have an accurate count as possible, because these numbers from the count, they go to our policymakers, both locally and nationally, and that in turn helps those that are experiencing homelessness in our cities and in our areas. Which leads to why count? Why do we do the homeless count? So many people, such a large effort. What's the point? This information is vital to ending homelessness in so many ways. We're going to focus on 3 important ones. The first one is we can begin to identify trends when we do our count. So every time we get to see which individuals or families are experiencing homelessness, whether that may be veterans or families, that helps us with determining what kind of services these people need. Second thing is it brings funds to those experiencing homelessness. So this is where policies are made and budgets are drafted so that we can help those through different service providers for those that are experiencing homelessness. And then the third one is probably the most important that we always need to remember. These are people, not numbers. So when we hear about the number of homeless and we talk about counting, we need to remember that these are actual people that this number represents. And I think that probably one of the main reasons of why you volunteered is because you want to help out. You want to help your community. You want to make your area a better place. And the homeless count is one of the most practical and best ways to do that and to help people experiencing homelessness in your cities and your neighborhoods. So with that, let's get to training you guys on how to do it. You volunteered, and this is why we're doing it. So let's get down to the volunteer training.
Great. So we're going to look at preparing before the count. We're going to go through run down the schedule the night of the count. Look at how the teams are going to be assigned and divided up and deployed, and then we'll take a closer look at maps. Okay, so how to prepare for the homeless count. Be sure to prepare for rain. It is El Nino season, and we want to make sure that everybody is prepared for rain. The count will go on rain or shine, so if it's raining outside, please do join us. If there's a extreme weather event, we'll contact you to let you know if the count is being postponed. But normal rain, plan on being there, and plan on being there unless you hear from somebody at LAHSA. Okay, so we want to dress appropriately. Make sure you wear comfortable walking shoes and a warm jacket. It's expected to be cold that evening. And if you plan on driving, make sure to fill up with gas beforehand and have your car cleared out and able to accommodate 3 other people, 4 total, including yourself.
All right, so let's look at just a basic rundown of the night. So the times may vary depending on your location, but this is a general rundown if you're doing the count at night. So at 8 p.m. it's a check-in. 8:15 we'll do a quick training just like this one, and then at 9 we'll team up and then we'll go count. So each team at this point will be given a map and supplies to count. They're going to walk or drive your area and thoroughly count every street, alley, and park, okay? And then after you're done counting, you're going to return to your deployment site 2 to 3 hours depending on the number of volunteers. Pro tip here, the more volunteers that we have, the faster it gets done, so make sure to invite your friends. And then everyone must return to the deployment site to check in with your coordinator. Okay, this is really important. We want to make sure that you return safely from counting, so don't go get a bite to eat or go watch a movie afterwards. Make sure that you return to your deployment site and check in with your coordinator.
Great, so teams, there's a couple of different types of teams. There's driving teams, which will be for driving census tracts, and we also have walking teams for walking census tracts. The walking census tracts are typically more densely populated and smaller. For the driving teams, we're going to have 4 people per team, a minimum of 2. We'll have a driver, navigator, counters, and we want to make sure we remember to thoroughly cover all areas in your census tract. You may need to park and walk some areas. So if you can't see an area from your vehicle, then you guys need to get out as a team and walk that area. Okay, so the driver, your main responsibility is to drive the team safely. So I want you to keep your eyes on the road and leave the visual identification of folks to counters and the navigator. The navigator is going to help the driver navigate around the assigned map. You'll also keep track of areas that have been covered and assist in counting when you're not navigating. The counters observe and document the number, gender, and age group of homeless people. You also note the number of vehicles, tents, and makeshift shelters that are being used as homes if you cannot connect that shelter with an individual. It's the counter's decision about whom to classify as homeless. So we'll want everybody to kind of give feedback if there's an ambiguous situation, but the counter will make that ultimate decision. And the counter's the one responsible for filling out the tally sheet. Walking census tracts are very similar to driving, except they're more densely populated, and they consist of walking teams. The teams, again, will be a maximum of 4 people and a minimum of 2. And they'll consist of counters. You want to coordinate with your team how you will get to and from your census tract area. So your walking census tract may be a bit away from the deployment site. So you guys maybe hop in one car and drive over there before you start walking, or agree to a place to meet in your census tract that will be counted. Okay, so for all teams, we want to try to incorporate a mix of men and women per team. This is primarily because of possible perceptions by individuals who are experiencing homelessness. So just put yourself in the shoes of a woman who may be living on the streets, and if 4 burly men walk up in her direction, it may be a bit intimidating. So we're trying to have a mix of men and women on each team. We also want to try to have a mix of folks who are experienced and then folks who may be out here for the first time, so that we can tap into the expertise of folks who have been with us in the past for the count. And just a quick note here on private property. Private property is off limits, so that includes locations like schools, so please respect private property. And also, just keep in mind that all teams will give all the equipment that they need. So maps, clipboards, pencils, flashlights, and other supplies will be available and distributed to you at the deployment site.
All right, let's talk about maps and the maps that you're going to be getting. Each team will be given a map once you guys get divided up into teams. And this is what they're going to look like. Here's your census tract map. So you have some clear borders here in red, and you have a key here on your left-hand side that will indicate different landmarks like parks or railroads or things like that. And what let's take a closer look inside this census tract here. So we're going to count everything on the inside of the red borders of this census tract. Okay, so we want to cover this whole area pretty thoroughly. But let's take, for example, two different situations. So let's look at this first street up on the top, Hill Road Street. This street acts as a border. So like every street, it's got two sides. But for bordering streets, you're going to count just the one side of the street that's on the inside of your census tract, not both sides. But let's look at the street that runs right through the middle of this census tract, Sumatro Street. On Sumatro Street, because it runs through the middle of your census tract, you're going to count both sides of that street. So make sure that you count the inside side for bordering roads, and then count both sides for all of the other roads in there. You want to make sure that you don't forget alleys. So if there's alleys that connect different streets together, you want to make sure that you cover those areas as well. You want to make sure that you cover parks. If you have a park in your census tract, you want to thoroughly cover the park. And make sure to cover shopping centers, the parking lots. Make sure to cover behind buildings as well. Okay, so this is extremely important. Report areas you are not able to reach. So if there is a safety concern, either through walking down an alley or through a park, or maybe geographically there's a really steep slope, that's okay. We just want to make sure that you report those areas and indicate those areas when you come back from counting, because we're going to need to send a special team to go count that area, because remember, accuracy is our goal for this count. But we also want to make sure that you are safe. So remember to report those areas you're not able to reach. And just throughout the time to count thoroughly, it's just a good thing to have in your mind, where would I sleep if I was sleeping in this area outside? What areas would I maybe try to find to sleep in? All right, how to count.
So we're going to look at how to identify homeless. We're going to look at tents and makeshift shelters, and take a closer look at the tally sheet, and talk a little bit about counting safely. So what do we look for when we're trying to identify homeless individuals? Remember, the goal tonight is accuracy and safety, and we want to, keeping that in mind, we want to try to record as accurate as possible those people who are experiencing homelessness in our area. So keep that in mind, use your best judgment, and use the ABCs: appearance, behavior, and condition. So there's a few signs or indicators that you may want to keep your eye out for. So poor physical condition, hygiene, weathered skin, lots of belongings, wearing many layers of clothing or blankets, pushing a cart, sleeping or lying down on the ground or a bench. Now, it's important to keep in mind that not just one of these indicators would necessarily mean that somebody's experiencing homelessness. We want to look at the whole picture and use your best judgment. So what about for vehicles? Oftentimes, there's vehicles that are in disrepair and parked by similar vehicles. The fogged up windows, blankets on the windows, cars just packed with belongings, parking tickets, street flyers on the windshield, and lights on inside. And again, just like the individual, we want to look at the whole picture here and use our best judgment. So I've received plenty of parking tickets in my day, but that doesn't mean I was living in my car at the time that the parking ticket was on my windshield. So let's pause here and have a little bit of a check-in. What are the signs that this car is being used as a home? Let's take a look there. I see a lot of belongings inside. I also see that the car looks a little bit older and run down, possibly in disrepair. I see a flyer or a parking ticket on the windshield. And so there's kind of a number of signs there that would indicate that this car is possibly being lived in. All right, now let's look at a few pictures of some RVs. So what are the signs that these RVs are being used as a home? We see in the top one that it looks like an older camper that's parked on the street. It's not in a driveway or really close to a home. We see that it's open. You see a lot of belongings on the front and the back that would indicate that this is being actively used. On the bottom there, we see a row of RVs. The front one looks actually in decent condition, but one thing to keep in mind is that there's limited street parking, overnight street parking in Los Angeles. And so folks who are living in an RV will find the open streets and park there together. So that's one indicator. Another indicator on this that you can't see in the picture is that there's actually a generator on the other side of that first camper that would indicate that somebody's living in there. And you see the front windshield is blocked out and the back windows are blocked out as well. So those are some indicators. Again, you need to use your best judgment and make a decision based on what you think there.
Let's take a look at makeshift shelters. So a makeshift shelter is any collection of items, whether it be a bedroll, blankets, shopping carts, boxes, dumpsters, etc., that are compiled, constructed, and used as a home by a homeless person at an outdoor location. So let's look at a couple examples here. So here we have our first example of a makeshift shelter. So we have someone who's used a fence with some tarps to cover their belongings and different things like that. And so this could be a little bit difficult to really decipher how many people are there, how many people are using this. Is this one or two? How do I determine what to tally on my tally sheet if I come across this scenario? So the key indicators here are to look for sleeping areas. So sleeping areas of common characteristics, so either with cardboard or a sleeping bag or something on the ground to cover it. And so you want to determine those areas. And so that's how you'll determine how many makeshift shelters there are, by the amount of sleeping areas that you can determine. So for this one specifically, we could determine that there were two. There was one under the gray tarp and then one under the blue tarp at the very end. And so they had their belongings next to them. But we saw two distinct sleeping areas, so we marked two makeshift shelters in our tally sheet. Here we have a tent that's next to a fence here, and they have a tarp over it. So this one is a little bit more confusing, where do I count a tent or do I count a makeshift shelter? What you want to do is you want to count the most prominent figure. So it looks like the tent is the most prominent structure there, and so we're going to count one tent on the tally sheet. Let's look at one more example here. We have a makeshift shelter where we have a person who, you can see, have a lot of belongings taking up a lot of space. And so how do we determine how many people are there? It's not necessarily determined on how much space they're taking up, but what we're looking at the sleeping area. So we saw here that this is just one. We could indicate one sleeping area that is under this blue tarp here. Even though they're taking up a lot more space than those first two, we can only determine one sleeping area, so we count one makeshift shelter. So this is important. Unless from a respectful distance you can see how many people there are in a makeshift shelter or tent, only count and tally the makeshift shelter or tent itself. Okay, so remember, this is just a visual count. We're not going up and asking, or we're just doing a visible count. So if you were to come across a tent or a makeshift shelter and you could clearly see that there is one or two individuals in that tent or in that makeshift shelter, which do you count? Do you count the tent or the individual or both? What you need to do is you count the individual. If you can clearly see that those are the only people that are living there at the time, it's priority to count the individual and not the tent or the makeshift shelter. So let's look here. How many tents would you count in this picture? So we have under this this underpass here, or this overpass, you have a number of tents. How many tents would you count in this picture? Take a second to look. The correct answer is 7. So we were able to identify 7 clearly marked distinctly different tents here. All right, let's look at the tally sheet. We've been talking about the tally sheet a lot. Paul, why don't you explain the tally sheet for us?
Great. So this is an overview picture of your 2016 tally sheet. Let's take a closer look, though. At the very top, we have some basic general information, and those will be completed by your deployment site coordinator in advance. So you'll see that you have your site coordinator's name and phone number there in case anything comes up that you need to reach them. And then you'll need to fill in your team leader name and the phone number, as well as all the team members and their phone numbers in case we need to follow up with any questions for you about your tally sheet. Also fill in the date, the time that you leave the deployment site, your departure time, and the time you return. Okay? So this section is, based on experience, will receive the most hashtags. And so this is where we're counting individuals, adults over 18, and then unaccompanied youth is 18 years of age and not with an adult. So we want to try and count both males and females, and then if you don't know the gender, then check the gender unknown, and that's for the under 18 section. This helps us with our youth count. Okay. Now, if you come across a family and you identify a group of people, looks like an adult or two with some minors, then we want to use this section here. Okay, so you for family number 1 there, you check the number of adults, and then the number of male youth, female youth, and then if you can't determine the gender, then just put a number of the gender unknown. Okay, and this is a section here where you will fill in hashtags for vehicles, tents, and makeshift shelters. And again, you only use this if you can't determine the exact number of people who are in that shelter. Okay, this is what your hashtag should look like. Straight lines until you get to 4, and then for number 5, you do a diagonal hash down and then restart that process. It's really important that you mark clearly on the tally sheet so it's easy to read when we come back. Also keep in mind that 0 is a valid number. It's just as important for us to know the areas that don't have any individuals experiencing homelessness in them as it is to know where those homeless individuals are and how many are there. So if you go out to a tract that doesn't have any, you don't spot any homelessness there, hey, that's great. It's a thing to celebrate, and it's also really good information for us in our planning. So, and then also be sure to return your tally sheet to the tally sheet validator at your deployment site when you're done counting.
This is kind of a fun fact. All those tally marks and all those tally sheets are brought together. We compile all those things, and all of those get sent to the U.S. Congress. These are the official numbers used by our government to determine how many people we have experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles, and you guys are part of that, which I think is pretty cool. But not just on a national level, this information helps your local community. Here at LAHSA, we gather all this information, and we have one of the most exhaustive and extensive counts for our community. So we get all these charts for you and graphs for you specifically for your neighborhoods so that we can help those cities and our neighborhoods for the people that are experiencing homelessness. And you guys are a part of helping that out, and we really appreciate it. So let's look here. Which would you count? Let's see if you guys were paying attention. So here's our first scene that you came across. Say you come across a scene, and which would you count? Would you count the individual, or would you count the tent, or would you count both on your tally sheet? Which ones would you do? The correct answer is A, count the individual. So you're just counting just the individual on the individual box. That's just one tally sheet, not the tent. All right, let's look at this situation. You have 2 RVs in the same neighborhood. You have the first one up here, and then you have the second one on the bottom. Which RV would you count? Would you count the first one, the second one, or would you count both? The correct answer is RV number 2. Okay, so we're just going to count RV number 2. The first one you can see is it's clearly tucked away back in a driveway next to a house. It's closed up like it hasn't been used in a while. So it's RV number 2. Give yourself a pat on the back if you got those right, and give yourself a pat on the back even if you didn't get it right. You were trying. That's the point of this training, right? All right. So we've gone over how to identify homeless, how to mark and count tents and makeshift shelters, and how to use the tally sheets. Now we're going to talk about counting safely. So we have some quick tips here for you to count safely. The most important one, don't disturb anyone. Remember, this is a visual count. So you're not going up and asking individuals if they're homeless. You're not knocking on tents or RVs, okay? Don't disturb anyone. We're just doing a visual count. Flashlights are for tally sheets, okay? They're not to be used for this. and they're not to be used for this either. That's so that you can see your tally sheet clearly. The other thing is, if you feel unsafe, so if there's a certain area, like we said, like in either an alley or a park, stop and just move on. Just make sure to report those areas you haven't covered. We're also going to equip you guys with some safety numbers. So if you see an emergency for whatever reason while you're counting, there's an emergency, call 911. Just go directly to 911 and let them know what's going on. The second thing is we're going to give you guys referral cards or 211 cards. Some areas, depending on the location that you're at, will have more specific service provider information. So this is for if homeless individuals or families come to you and want more information, you can give them these referral cards. You'll have your deployment site coordinator number on the top of your tally sheet, so if you have any questions, if you're confused about anything, you can call them and they can answer any of the questions you might have. And then we're also going to equip you guys with your local law enforcement contact as well on the night of the count. Media.
Okay, so this is a pretty big event with 6,000 of you guys out there in the community. We expect the media to be interested. So what do you do if the reporter shows up? It's really important that if you feel comfortable, feel free to share with the reporter about your volunteer experience. You may want to share why you chose to volunteer for the homeless count, how your experience is going so far. But if they want a more detailed information, you can direct them to the deployment site coordinator. And the deployment site coordinator can give them instructions on how to reach the LAHSA media spokesperson to speak on behalf of LAHSA.
And here's our final thing. We're just going to go over the release, indemnity, and waiver liability agreement. This is for the night of the count. So just so that you guys become aware of it when you guys show up to go count. You're just gonna, we're gonna give out the liabilities agreement. Just take a moment to review and sign it. And you're gonna please hand them in before you deploy to count. So you must turn these into volunteers. So this is really, really important. You can't go out and count unless we get those waiver forms signed. All the volunteers that are 17 and younger, you're going to see your deployment site coordinator for special instructions. We really appreciate our younger volunteers helping out at the deployment site. So make sure to give them a high five when you see them that night. And then if you have any questions about the waiver liability agreement, you can just ask your deployment site coordinator.
Great. So if you have any questions that have come up from this training or any questions that you have generally about the homeless count, please feel free to contact your deployment site coordinator.